we'll talk about that in a second. And here we are for an episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. It is Monday. It is the last Monday before I stop being 44 years old. I'm going to be turning 45 in less than a week here. Very excited about that. Again, doesn't mean a whole hell of a lot, but it kind of does to me, because you start thinking about certain things like, holy fuck, I'm still here. That definitely does creep across my mind, as well as holy fuck, my hip hurts, which is another thing. And so I was just reflecting on how much I appreciate just life as a whole. I really have. It's been nice to reflect on that. But I've also been reflecting on some very cool changes that have been happening recently. Today we went and picked up the second to last items that we need for our new podcast setup, which means, excuse me, that this quality of audio that you've gotten used to in recent days on Dualistic Unity will be changing. We have decided to set up, to get a new mic set up. We had a kind of a preview of that on our Patreon post recently. We were talking about picking up some mics and a couple of mic arms, and of course we have a new recording setup. So we are excited. I am excited to say that very shortly we're going to have some fucking badass audio coming. This is going to sound a lot clearer. It's going to sound like we're right up here with you, talking in your ear, eh?
Just whispering, ready to I don't know, maybe give a little. No, I'm not gonna go there. My mind started going to crazy places, and I was like, we're not gonna do that. But it's gonna sound great, because it's gonna be what, three? We're gonna have three mics and the little the arm things, so it'll be very super official looking, which will be a new thing. We won't do too much of that, but we got a new camera we're gonna be working with here too, so get ready for some upgrades to, not the conversation necessarily, because that's always going to be whatever it is, but the the video clips and the audio stuff.
Right.
Yeehaw.
Right. So if you ever say you missed an insight, you can't say it's because of the audio.
Yeah.
Just
No
kidding.
more of that.
No, but it's just the best insights are going to come from you anyways, right? So what you're hearing from us is just attempts at existing, and really it's just attempts at not getting in the way of existing, because existence is what remains when we're not trying to get anywhere. And so it is really cool to be able to share the current step that we're on, which comes with upgraded equipment, and we are pumped and excited to unveil that in action very soon.
Next, pyrotechnics.
Boom. That step is going to be on a fire.
Explosions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, some fireworks. Shit like that. Now, what's funny about that is it's a podcast, which means we just have explosions happening in here for no reason.
Hey, you know
Right,
what? I mean,
right.
one of those smoke bombs. I'm telling you, to try. We can figure out how to make one of those and
It'll
start
happen.
every episode.
Technology is advancing every day. If anybody is out there with the technology to create a ninja smoke bomb that's actually like serviceable and not dangerous,
Non-flammable.
please let me know. This is a lifelong dream.
That's right. Let's turn those dreams into reality.
Why not?
Together.
Practice some spares wherever you go.
That's
Yeah,
right.
teamwork makes the dream
I
work,
was
though,
just
you know?
thinking that. I love that you said that.
It's really what it's all about. And yeah, there's a lot more space to do that when it's like, oh, it's not so much about how you're doing personally, like that. Pam, someone who's in the community and whatnot, brought up the not needing to check in on yourself all the time, a while ago, and that stuck with me.
Yeah,
it really has. You don't have to keep wondering, how am I doing, and responding to that immediately. It's like you can almost like take a step back from that and just realize, like, you know, one way or another, you're not going to know anyway. And like not knowing what's around the next corner, there's sort of an inherent enthusiasm that you can have for each and every step, which is dope. So, yeah, we got some very cool next steps coming up here soon. So we do see around corners from time to time as we play things out here.
Peeks.
But yeah, got some dope stuff coming around the bend in a fun week.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
As always, our weeks with karaoke, and then we got
karaoke. We got a bunch of shit happening, and again, and it's just interesting. We had an episode with Levi earlier today. If anybody didn't catch the live recording of that, it's going to be it's going to be released as season 6, episode 36 in the very near future, or it possibly already has if you're listening to this after the fact. But we were talking about exactly that. What kind of a world would it be if we empowered one another and actually allowed ourselves to change the world rather than holding each other back because we hold ourselves back, right? Rather than taking from others because we need more for ourselves. It doesn't make any sense at the end of the day. It makes sense in a very limited mentality, but then you look around at the world generations later and you go, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like the polarity between rich and poor makes a lot of fucking sense in a world where selfishness is the norm.
Right.
Absolutely. Does that mean it makes sense in a world where everybody is spawned from this planet, is in fact the planet being alive, and yet they're all toiling to survive in an environment that doesn't exist organically,
right? That
we've created? Like, it's insane. People starve to death on a planet filled with food. With the ability to grow food, people are told that you cannot collect rainwater because it belongs to your state.
Well, the state owns the land, so of course they also own the air and the water too. Like, it doesn't make any sense that you pay to live on the planet. Like, what is the government going to do if all of us didn't pay rent? Send us to Mars? Like, what are you really going to do if we didn't agree to this insane system where you're paying to live, to eat, to drink water, to grow your own food? Like, it just doesn't make sense that we're paying to live on this planet. And if we collectively just played hooky for a day from the system, what would they do? Throw us all in jail? There's not enough jail space for that. And they couldn't eject us from this planet. They couldn't evict you from the planet if you didn't pay to live on the planet that you came from. Like,
right.
It just like.
But they know that. And so now it's about public opinion, right? Like, what keeps us in line is everyone else.
We self-police.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Living up to even people's standards. The same people who will come up to you and lecture you about how your life choices aren't good life choices because they're validating their own life choices. Those are the motherfuckers that make you feel like you're not able to be enough, that you're not able to express yourself, that you aren't going to be received well because they're not receiving you well.
That you can't live for yourself, that you need to live for the approval of others, especially theirs.
Yeah. And so much comes down to just self-validation. Just like, I don't want to be alone in my opinion of what's going on, my opinion of my life, my opinion of how I'm living the right way, like trying to find that right way, and then just assuming, because with the wealth gap and the extreme amount of, lack of attention, insensitivity to what's going on, like that belief in just having consistent, constant comfort is really what a lot of that sort of mentality creates, is like this push for not being able to see beyond yourself. And so it takes some self-honesty to be like, oh, this isn't doing it. Like, consistent comfort, consistently trying to feel good all the time and just doing things focused on yourself, keeping yourself in a loop of measurement and how am I doing, never quite feeling like enough because you're keeping yourself within those, those barriers. It's like it takes some self-honesty to look and be like, oh, this isn't doing it. Like this isn't, I don't feel great necessarily. And that's, that's when it shifts. Like maybe all this comfort and money and belongings and things aren't the answer. Maybe it's not going to guarantee anything about what's next.
You shut your dirty mouth.
Right? And it's not working like right now. And that's why you see people that have millions, sometimes billions of dollars, and yet they still act like they're about to go bankrupt. Like we know people that there is like, regardless what your ideal life is, in my opinion, I think regardless of what you think the ideal life is, there is somebody that's living that now and they're not happy. And so I think it's like we can see that it's just not working, and we keep trying to run in this direction, and it feels like we're running in place and we're pretending that we're running faster and faster, but we're not getting anywhere, but we think we're so close. And it's just like, it's not working the way that we are living. And I think that is we got to see a lot of questioning of the system and the current way things are in COVID, when people had a significant amount of time where they were forced not to maintain those habits and those roles and those structures, those day-to-day structures. And I think that was that has been a really lucky opportunity for us to see that the way that we were living wasn't worth the effort that it required.
Well said. It's like it took that shift, the opportunity for people to just live a little bit differently, even though it felt like, with lockdowns and everything. Yeah, it did kind of force a shift, even just in another direction, almost. But yeah, like even the focus on something in the future too, like that thing to look forward to, like having that next thing, or feeling like, with the carrot, it's always about that next thing. It's like that almost maintenance of a guarantee can keep you not quite where you're at, like just a little bit ahead of where you're at, even with doing something that is good for you, but you're not crazy about doing. It can still be this, oh well, I'm gonna get through this so that I feel better after. I'm gonna go through this exercise because I'll feel better afterwards, instead of like sinking in. Like there's still an opportunity even in those experiences to sink in to that and really get a good look and feeling like there's a fullness to that experience, just because it's not something that's maybe super comfortable, like lifting weights or something that you didn't really feel like doing. If you don't like doing that, it's still like there's still experience there. Like it's still experienced no differently than a more quote unquote comfortable experience. Like a lot of the variation comes down to like a core sort of opinion preference to how I prefer to feel, even, as we kind of go through ebbs and flows, and that sense of like being in the ocean, when things start feeling certain ways, it's like, well, this, and it's like that's part of everything going on too. It's like, can you still sink in to this, whatever experience you're having right now, whatever feelings you're feeling right now. It's like, because there's still the same opportunity, no matter what.
I know when you were the questions that come to mind right now, it's like, I sometimes ask myself, like, can I let go, and like how deep can I go into this experience, and that question in and of itself is what kind of delays the experience from being fully felt, because the question isn't the doing, the thinking isn't the doing. So when I question, can I let this go? How am I doing? Can I live this experience fully? It's like, that is not living right there. That is not doing right there. And it's like, I'll never know in thought alone. And I'll never know in action. It's just, but I will be able to pay attention, and I can give myself the best access, so that I can give myself the largest access to potential if I can, as I'm stepping through, as I'm paying attention.
Yeah. Well, that's it, right? It's the difference, knowing the difference that all you get is attention. That's really what you get. This fiction that you can know, that you can measure your progress, that you can live well as opposed to just live with attention and sensitivity. And you could say, well, that's living well. No, it's just living. And it's just because living like that doesn't mean you're always feeling quote unquote well. It doesn't mean that you like what you're going through. It just means that the opinion is less important than the attention you pay to what's actually happening. But so often we think, no, my opinion is the forefront of this experience, because so much of my emotional environment is based on that opinion. It's like, aha. So let's look at that. You know, let's look at the fact that the more you focus on that opinion, and therefore your perception, the less you are focused on what you're doing. You know, but the more emotions you start to feel. Isn't it funny? Like when you're just like, well, it is what it is. There's almost like this calm oasis that engulfs you, because your opinion's no longer right there in the front of your face. It's just what's there.
Yeah.
And isn't that funny? The emotions go away. Why? Because they were tied to the fiction, to the opinion.
Right. Right. And it feels like, and right now I want to describe it in this order. Maybe it might be that we feel the feeling first, and then we try to describe the feeling with the story. And then every time we tell that story, it's tied to that feeling. And we keep telling the story, and we keep thinking that because we have a feeling that we tied specifically to that story, that the feeling can't be separate from the story. But the story is what we use to first describe the feeling, but the feeling was just an experience that didn't need an explanation.
Yeah, it's like trying to make sense of feelings, you know, whatever that is. It's like as soon as you label it and then have some idea or some focus on believing that, oh yeah, there is an importance to opinion or preference, or that there even is backing behind it. It's like there is sort of things that are like routes post opinion. You don't even realize that was the initial thing that you were focused on. It's like there are things that stem from that initial opinion that's irrelevant. You know, it's always irrelevant. It's like you always have the opportunity, because you're not, you know, you're a component of the experience that you're having. Like you are obviously a massive component of that. And so to put yourself in the way of experience is just like, of course you're going to feel tense. Of course, if your focus is, you know, on yourself and how you're doing first, then of course there's going to be, it's like you're going to be trying to pay attention around a person who keeps standing in front of you. It's like you can look past that, and there can be a practice in that even.
So funny. It goes right back to that conversation we were having about the archer, the story in the Tao Te Ching, where they talk about if you're focused on the target, but you're also focused on the prize, then your attention is split. But we see a 50-50 split there. But if that prize means something about the person, if that prize means something about their future, means something about how they'll be perceived, think about how much more attention is on that prize. All of a sudden, that percentage is way out of whack. All of a sudden, you're like 2% on the target, 98%. God, I hope I don't fuck this up. And your attention's not there. And it really is that. It's this fucking teeter-totter in our head where it's like, where do you want to invest? Where do you want to invest? And that's what we're often talking about, is how many of our investments have been going on autopilot for so long because they are societally validated, they are common, they are even reinforced in terms of our economy, our belief system, our overdependence on identity as a whole.
You get shunned when you don't pursue them.
Exactly.
Oh, it's insane. Like the fact that it's more likely that someone would judge someone for dancing silly in the street than someone who like shows off their, you know, $15 million house on MTV Cribs. You know, like those two examples.
Mhm.
It's like no one bats an eye at that house, and then someone is like being goofy and silly, and it's like
Oh
that
my
person
God.
gets judged. And if you mention anything about how ridiculous it is for one person to have like, you know, $1 billion, they're like, oh well, they earned it. How dare you think that, you know, they
What are you, a
can get
communist?
there? Yeah,
that's
but
totally
like,
normalized.
then it's like snap of a finger, and it could be, oh, just for someone living a little bit differently. That's all it is. Like, that's so much of what it comes down to is like self-validation of the things that I'm focused on. And it's like, it's so much our unique perspective of ourself that is reflected through our opinions and what we let slide in the world, and what we don't stand for is the things in ourself that we're letting ourselves slide for, versus looking at in ourselves or holding ourselves back from. Like, if someone's holding themselves back from dancing in the street, you know, they're gonna, like, almost by default, like, judge someone for dancing in the street if they're letting themselves be super greedy and hold on to, like, you know, $10 billion themselves. Then anyone else is doing that, they're going to let that slide. It's like always your own focus of yourself.
Right. The people who want to be billionaires see no problem with being a billionaire.
Yeah.
You know, and it's always like that. It's like, if I can justify me wanting to do that activity, pursue that goal, then there must not be anything wrong with that goal. And it's just another way for us to, you know, make sense of something that just seems pointless. You know, I'm trying to fill this feeling of lack with a physical thing, like that doesn't make any sense. There is no item that you could buy that would eliminate the insecurity, you know. But we don't want to look at the feeling. We only want to look at the, you know, we only want to focus on the coping mechanism. We want to focus on the distraction, which is very reflective of how we're living, where we don't want to focus on here, where the feelings are happening, where life is happening. No, we want to focus on the distractions. We want to focus on the there, because we think that it's not worth it, or that we are not capable of being here with with the feelings that happen to pop up. And I caught myself saying with our feelings, because it's so easy for us to take ownership, to think that I own it and therefore it is a part of me. And it's just feelings. It's just things that are happening. And our opinion is a tool that very much becomes a crutch.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just want to take a moment to remind everybody that we have Patreon after this. It is Monday, which means that we have a Patreon group at 7:30 Eastern time. It is a tier 1 call, which means that you can join us on the screen in a group Zoom. We do these 5 days a week. You can be part of the conversation. You don't have to be. You don't even have to be on the screen if you don't want to. You can just listen along. You can be on our Patreon for $5 a month as a tier 1. There's also a 7-day free trial as a tier 2 member. And being a Patreon supporter, last plug, I promise you, in regards to Patreon, also offers sick discounts on our workshops, on our retreat tickets, and you get behind the scenes stuff, and we post some cool shit on there from when we were out and about. I know somebody earlier asked, like, what's it cool? How are the pubs in your area? You can find that content on Patreon, because we post some of our adventures on there, or follow us on Instagram, which brings me to another announcement. We are growing our Dualistic Unity accounts on TikTok and Instagram, and shortly Snapchat.
Yeah.
So if you're on any of those platforms, look up Dualistic Unity. We would love for you to follow us, and we would love to share our content with you.
And they're growing. We're at like over 12,000 on TikTok and like almost 23,000 on Instagram. 11,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Now that's a funny conversation there, because I know lately, because now we're changing the way that Dualistic Unity works. As we said, we've recently done a first round of investment, and that is completely done. Now we have a 12-month marketing campaign that is going to be moving forward, and in that marketing campaign, we've had to have conversations about what our quote-unquote goals or what the purpose of the marketing campaign is. And so often with products, especially, and I know I did online marketing for a long time, as did Andrew, as has Amanda. So often the focus is, well, how many followers do you have? And you can have millions of followers who are not engaged at all, but you keep just trying to sell something to, right?
Yeah.
And kind of hit or miss, and you're hoping for the best. And for us, we know that having 1,000 followers who are only listening for another way to validate themselves, those followers aren't going to last very long, and they're not going to get a lot out of this conversation because we offer very little in the way of like soothing or comfort. We're just like, yeah, life's hard. We're there too. Strap in. Let's talk about it, and it's not just like it's all going to get better and we're all full of love and light and God is here for us and source consciousness, and we don't do any of that. So we've been working on ads, and I loved it. I love the process of this because we've realized that the best thing that we can do with our advertisements is make them actually really hard to sit through. To take a clip from the podcast that's actually rather challenging, maybe not moving along at a very fast pace, but is it just a normal conversation, and then posting a 3-minute clip of it up on TikTok and throwing an ad or boosting it monetarily. And we get lots of plays, but only a few people, well, not a few people, quite a few people, but a small percentage click through. And those are the people that were like, yeah, they're going to listen. And 100 of those people will contribute to the conversations, to the group Discord, to the Patreon groups, to the comment section. They will have conversations in their own life because it means something to them.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so very exciting. So the goal is not to have as many followers as possible, but to actually just be as authentic as we can and let the people who resonate with it come to us. The advertising is really just a way of putting it out there.
Yeah.
It's all it is. More lines in the water. For anybody who's looking for that kind of fucking meal.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, here we are. But so often, like Alan Watts, perfect example. Alan Watts was an anomaly. He's not the only person that talked like Alan Watts. He just happened to be a person who had access to a college radio.
Yeah, that
Right?
was
Oh, that was his.
That was where
big
he
in
started.
there.
People started
Okay.
listening to him. They're like, oh my God, this is some cool shit. He gathered a little bit of a following, and then he went on with his life doing other stuff, doing other research, doing other studies in the East and whatnot. And he just continued to make more and more of an impact because people heard about it.
Mhm.
But how many other people out there were saying similar things from a different perspective that didn't have access to college radio?
Right.
So this is a chance for us to give people like this access, because that's what it is for us,
Mhm.
right? It's not about credit. It's about just being out there,
Mhm.
unafraid of that backlash, unafraid of that common mentality that doesn't understand what we're doing or why. Which is why so often we'll get people going, oh, well, the only reason you're doing this is because you want followers to make you feel like you know what's right. So everybody has to follow your ideology. Like, what ideology? What philosophy are you talking about exactly? And they can never answer that.
Right.
But that is the only reason they would put this much time, attention, commitment, authenticity, vulnerability. That's the only reason they would do any of this, is because they want followers. They want to be validated. So that they can't understand why someone would do that without a reward. That is, I think, one of the most powerful things about this is that the mentality that is currently most common can't even see this fucking conversation without ridiculing it. It can't take it seriously because it doesn't understand not having a carrot.
Yeah. It's like it's not gonna make sense because I appreciate you bringing up the actions of it, like just being out there, just being willing to express yourself authentically. Like it's not about words at all. And when sometimes I'll, not want to express myself as authentically, like almost revert the conversation to the conversation. Like even fucking yesterday, like put a story up kind of talking about like how, with the, I posted that dress video
right.
to you for the original
Great video.
idea on
Yeah.
that. And it was just kind of going on about the, I know you don't care.
That's exactly the point.
I
though,
know.
Right? Like anybody
I know.
can put on a dress and make the same point.
Exactly. And that's why we've been more and more shifting away from like, you know, it being just about us, because it's like no one has any ability to express any specific thing more better, that's how I'm going to leave it, because I'm sure someone could express that a little
more better
in a more in a betterer way.
Really. So yeah. I could express you better than you. I love that. That's great.
Oh,
that's the shit that we do, man.
It is. It's
we're
so
like,
much
no. You could express me better than me. Somebody could no, but we discount experience.
Yeah.
And that we share. And the way that we see it happening most often is discounting direct experience, but somehow elevating other experiences, experts. Their experience must matter because they are somehow better. But my experience is just level 1 experience where we're just like barely figuring out left from right. You know, and that's the way that we think about it. But it's like there's no better insight that you could hear that's not coming from you. And then it's usually coming from your experience. It's not that you thought an amazing insight, is that some experience that you are in the middle of is sharing something that is hard to put into words. And that is usually the best insight. And then when we put it into words, it's a poor substitute for the experience that really we're trying to describe. But we call it an insight, and therefore it almost implies that insight is all thought, but the insight is really trying to express the experience that was just embodied.
Yep. That's the thing, is that, you know, the insight becomes thought, right? Whereas really it was the cessation of thought. That's why I've always said that insight and thought feel very different. Thought feels like effort, insight feels like it just happens on its own. It's like you get out of the way and you're like, oh, those two things fit together. It's a very, very different experience. Whereas thought, it's like you're trying to find your way to something and you're trying to force things together. It's very different. So I find myself now like realizing that the thought is kind of like panic fire. You know, like my brain's just like, quick, find the answer. And when
something immediately.
And immediately, like I'll actually feel myself, especially if it's a problem or something that needs to be solved in a certain amount of time, like I'll feel myself get worked up, my body will go flush, I'll get all fucking warm and sweaty and shit, like for sure. And more or less now I'm just like, okay, I'm just gonna sit here and not actually actively think about it, but I'm just gonna breathe and try to stop that instant clench. And then my brain's just like, oh, thanks for getting out of the fucking way. And all of a sudden there's like, oh, an obvious answer. Like, just do this. But immediately it's that, oh, fuck, I got to figure this out. And there's a panic that goes with it because it's got to go the right way. And you don't recognize that your brain is designed for this shit. It's a problem-solving machine. But if you're the problem, you can't ever be solved. And so all of your attention is now on this unsolvable non-problem that your brain can't let go of because you won't fucking let it.
You just keep cycling through different reasons trying to solve yourself. Yeah. It's gotta be something. It's gotta be this and that and this. And if you can just, and that's that sense of control, you know, all the thoughts pop up, the fluttering thoughts, like we've always mentioned about food. Sometimes it'll just pass by and, you know, he'll notice and he doesn't have to give it all the attention. It's the same thing with, you know, certain fears and concerns and worries and all of those things, like this assumption that, oh, if I could just control that away from happening, then I'll be okay. And you can flutter through, you know, 10 things at once. And it's like, are you really going to control all of that stuff, every single thing? And, you know, like in Star Wars, Anakin, you know, spoiler. You haven't seen Star Wars, go do it.
Damn right.
If you have, then no worries. Like,
do it now.
And all right, yeah, he's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, like he sees these future situations, and then he tries to control his way around them instead of just letting them almost like sit in potential.
Right.
Because it's like he was seeing a potential that he, by trying to control it away, created. Right. And it's like it wouldn't have necessarily not happened if he didn't. It was just an infinite potential that then his attention created from himself. Like that's, we talk about like, oh, being powerful and whatnot. It's through things like that. Like we are self-fulfilling prophecies with our focuses, when our desire to control, with our desire to control certain things, certain situations.
Oh yeah.
Assuming that we can like do something to have that degree of control. It's like, that's really assuming like you not only know a lot, but can do a lot at one time.
My favorite and least favorite self-fulfilling prophecy, because it's so very obvious when you're not doing it. I'm not a likable person. And it's because the more you hold on to that, the more of a gap there is between you and the people that you're talking to, because you're assuming that they're judging you. So you're not really listening to them. And when you do interact with them, it's always in the way of some form of self-validation, because now you're not feeling like you're enough, because you've told yourself that you're not enough. And so those people start to back the fuck off. They start to talk to you less. They even start to get a little fucking tired of it, reinforcing the story that you told yourself.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is. It is you're telling them, I don't want you to like me.
Yeah.
Yeah, straight up, like inadvertently, sure, but it's from that focus, you know, the focus on assuming, like assuming that you can know something. Like, I know this for sure. And then you just keep, it's like you trade that false certainty for your experience.
You have a phone call.
Oh, I gotta come out. You trade that false certainty for your experience. Like, I'm gonna know this thing in my head right now, as opposed to paying attention to being involved. Like that's that attention, you know, your attention is split one way or the other. And it's like, it doesn't have to be, but that's, you know, that's on you to decide.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and so there's a comment here focusing on negativity. I would say focusing on positivity also has a detrimental impact.
For positivity.
Well, and what's worse about that though is that you may find people who are like, yeah, love that energy, but they're the same kind of person.
Yeah.
They're in fact looking for the same positivity, right?
They're looking for positive validation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh yeah, I'm a real achieving kind of person. You know, I'm a go-getter.
You're a positive Patty.
Positive Patty, absolutely. You know, like and all that, and it's just so very hard to maintain because it's not honest. Absolutely. You know, if somebody comes and takes a piss in your cornflacks, you're not going to be like, yay. You know,
thank you, sir. I have another.
This relationship shouldn't became
but again, it's the question of, do I need to check in with myself, which includes the question, is this a positive or negative experience?
Is there a problem?
Right? Because what is that based on other than like my assumption and my perception and my preferences?
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
That's really it. And my preferences have been the cornerstone of my life for so very long. And then I wonder why I'm always upset and resentful and pissed off.
Right.
Because the world doesn't give a fuck about my preferences. But you can sit there expecting it to. You can get together in groups and demand the system fucking changes to your preferences.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But what happens? Eventually you're going to form another preference and you're going to demand the system change that. Somebody is eventually going to say no. Somebody is eventually going to say no, and you're going to have to deal with the fact that the world is not here to cater to you.
Or someone is going to say yes, and you're going to realize the preference didn't matter because it didn't do what it promised to do, which was to give you certainty, which was to give you the elimination of insecurities and doubts and all those things. And it just doesn't work. That's why I like the way that Jim Carrey puts it, where he puts it in very two specific examples. I wish everybody could be rich and famous, but it's like, I wish everybody could get everything that they wanted right now on their magical list if they could get it. And you would see that getting all the yeses wouldn't make you feel any better, right? Because you'd see that you didn't need to feel worse to begin with. Right? You gave yourself, you decided, I am somehow less than, I am somehow in an inferior position, and therefore I need my wish list to be granted because somehow this is not enough. And then you get all these external things. There are the people who have those houses, have those jobs, have all the money, are young and quote unquote beautiful and loved by everybody and popular, and yet still feel alone. And it's because they're still in conflict with here. And that's what it all looks like at its core, is just being in conflict with here.
Yeah, and that sense of like even the getting what you want, because the world right now, it feels like in certain areas and bubbles that you can get whatever you want. Amazon's getting closer and closer to immediate delivery, but like that sense of
Teleportation's
wanting,
coming, man.
yeah, it's very close. Like that sense of wanting, though, no matter what you get, like it doesn't get rid of where that comes from. Like,
Nope.
why do you have to want another thing? Like there's always that pull, that desire
Here's
for
my favorite
one
excuse.
step ahead.
It's human nature.
Oh,
Yeah. It's just that, oh my gosh.
is it human nature? Because when an animal is in the jungle and it eats too much food, it either gets too slow and something bigger eats it, or it's like nothing gets what it wants for too long. It always comes to an end, because when you're not paying attention, you're just going to be shorting yourself of that experience. That's why I like that. At some point you hit a wall. You always hit a wall, because whether or not you're sensitive enough to see when too much is happening, it's like reality will reflect what's happening and not your preference. That's why you can't keep getting what you want. It won't ever work for very long. And even if you do, you always have to get something else. You need a new distraction. You need a new goal, something else, because that fruit just somehow doesn't stay sweet forever.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, here's the problem with the whole human nature thing. It's kind of self-defined, right? And very much based on the level of self-development that we collectively reflect.
Or
lack of. I mean, the fact is that if you had humans that only live to a certain age or mentality, they would only be able to develop to a certain point. We only live till 30 or 40 years old, like up until a couple hundred years ago, right? So if we're defining human nature based on our predecessors, they didn't have much time. They didn't have much time. This is why back then they're like, respect your elders, because they're 40, 50, 60, and have had enough time to maybe take themselves a little less seriously, maybe.
Yeah.
Right? But now we have a different culture, and maybe it's time that we reassess human nature according to the development that we are able to actually have the time to go through now.
Well, a lot of it too is like the amount of people who are living, if there is, a lot of gaps in equality and sense of living and cost of living and all of that. Like as people get older, like the oldest people are the ones who, were able to survive in this society the longest. So there's even going to be a skew there with the ones who are left a lot of times are people who were able to stay more comfortable. And if that's the ultimate thing that we're looking for, it's like those who maybe weren't able to survive in the same way, because this is still, a society of survival. It's not the same as being in the forest, but it's very much still that same sense of like everyone's trying to survive. And for some, it's seems like they've figured out that way, and if they're not willing to look past themselves, it's like there doesn't seem like there needs to be. But again, then it's just passed off with cognitive dissonance and human nature. But that sense of being able to survive long enough even and to give you that sense of superiority, it's like that's going to skew our perspective of things. So maybe with the focus being on people who are more so going through stuff, because the world was way different when those in their 70s and 80s were in their 20s. Like it's a different world. You can't look back and be like, hey, you should be this way, act this way, do these things, world should work this way. It's like world's shifted, and we've tried to keep what that world was for a long time, or just continue to maintain and kind of shred it down.
Right. It'd be cool if parents were kind of raising their kids to be like recon agents, you know. It's like, I'm going to give you all my intel that I've gathered over my lifetime. And then you're going to go out there, you're going to gather some other intel, you're going to bring it back here, and we're going to figure out what's the coolest option that we can share, you know. And you know, and I've heard people say that it's like, you know, the old, and I think it was KRS-One, one of the original rappers from New York. He goes around and he has talks, and I think he has a podcast now. And I saw one of his videos where he was sitting in a just on a street with a group of people, and he was just chatting with them about how important it is to listen to each other regardless of age, because he made an excellent point that, you know, the older people who listen to younger people do better in this newer age, because they're learning from the younger people how all these new gadgets, all these new buttons, all the new intel, right? And they do the best. The older people who don't listen to the younger people have a harder time adjusting and assimilating with newer changes. The younger people who listen to older people tend to do better, because they get to take from the experiences that have been compiled over decades, and they get to pull little nuggets and use that, and then they have better interpersonal skills. And the younger people who don't listen to the older people tend to struggle the most, and when it comes to interpersonal connections. But when the younger people and the older people are listening to each other, everyone is getting the best of both worlds. And that's why I love that, you know, it doesn't really matter what age you come from, what bracket, what bathroom you go to, like every experience is so rich, and there's so much that you can learn from people. So it doesn't matter if someone's title, status, or age, or gender, or religious background. There is just such a richness to experience, and you can always have the best of all the worlds if you can see that there isn't one superior age group, demographic, perspective, that there's something to get from all of them when you're open to all of them and not trying to rank them in terms of value.
Yeah. So it's like everyone has such a unique experience to settle on, you know, oh, well, I only listen to people who are this age, this, you know, this background, this school, this thing, this, that, like this level of how I deem society to be. It's like so much of the back and forths are just a desire to like self-validate and be correct, in my opinion. Like, I value my opinion so much that I want everyone I'm around to validate that. And that's like so much of communities and so many, you know, groups. It's one thing with like religion and the church having like a sort of community and a shared belief system, but it's the same for, you know, broader communities, like areas in, you know, parts of towns, you know, there's so much sort of layered on top perspectives or assumptions about certain spots that each, like, all of them are made up of very, very unique individuals. Like, it's I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about just like this idea of groups and how they don't really exist in the same way. Like, it's all just individuals, just like you. So we're like experiencing something that feels very alone. But then a lot of times, if we're thinking about stuff, it's thinking about broader, you know, groups together. But those are all individuals whose experience isn't so different than our own. But if we're thinking about groups,
right? But don't tell them that, because that's the reason that we form into groups. See, when we're in a group, we're all in this together. Immediately, there's less responsibility. Yeah. Immediately, which is why George Carlin used to say, I love people. When you sit down with a person and you listen to them and you talk to them, they're very reasonable. They're very, you know, honest. You know, they're very self-reflective. But you get 2 or 3 or more of them together, and all of a sudden it's like their IQ goes out the fucking window. And it's because there is immediately this sense of we're all in this together, so I don't need to be on the ball myself. And before you know it, you have a mob following a single person with a pitchfork who has no understanding of what the fuck is happening. Right? Everybody's just going in a direction. And they all just validate one another without ever stopping. Because if anybody does question the mob, they're immediately not part of the mob.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're not with us, you're against us, and in a certain mentality, that is more true. In a fearful mentality, that is more true.
Yeah.
When we're afraid, we cluster together. And when we cluster together, we become irresponsible. So now we're afraid and irresponsible. What could go wrong?
Just very unaware and very one-track minded. And that one-track mind, there's very little, obviously, there's so little space for anything novel to be expressed through that, but it's also like there's parts of us that would rather just condense that, like with anything that sort of numbs our experience. It's like cutting down the edges, cutting down the fluctuations instead of like having faith in yourself to ride those fluctuations. Like we want something outside of us to do it for us, and like as long as there's even that push for, like even letting go of that push, that desire for something outside of yourself, the assumption that like there is anything whatsoever that could do it, like any situation, period, whether it's the one you're in or a different one, like none of them will do it to you or for you. And so even just that, like it's can brings me back to just making the most of whatever experience I'm in.
What you got?
This is it.
That's it. Yeah.
Like there isn't anything else. Like even the thoughts about anything are just ghosts. Like they're just like shadows. They're just ideas that you can't really pinpoint anyway, but you can use to, I don't know, give some attention.
Somebody actually said this at the beginning of the stream.
Yeah.
All my thoughts are phantoms.
That's awesome. They are like shadows.
Mm-hmm.
Shadows that I run from. Then I see it's just my shadow, and it feels like a Scooby-Doo episode all over again. You take off the mask, and it's me. I was like, damn it. It was always been me. Damn those kids.
And that dog.
And that damn dog, too. I love that you brought it back to 90s cartoons, man. No, because life feels like a video game, sometimes in a cartoon, and sometimes it feels like a nightmare. But a lot of the nightmares are coming from the same place that my dreams, goals, and preferences do, my imagination. And the imagination feels like a wonderful place, and it can, but it is also very easy to forget that it can just as easily create a nightmare that feels just as real as the dream that you're hoping for. So it's just not needing to be entirely sure that I know what's happening, good or bad, and giving myself the best shot at making the most of what's happening by paying attention to what's happening. And what'll give me the best shot for what's coming around the corner, paying attention to what's happening now so I can see the transition when things are changing. But if change feels like it comes out of nowhere when I'm not paying attention to anything, then all of a sudden it's like, well, where did that come from? It's like this moment. That's where these things are coming from. And everything happens here. There's nothing that happens there, and then all of a sudden it arrives and it's in a surprise box. It's like anything that happens is happening here, but here feels like a surprise when you're thinking about there.
Well, and so I find this fascinating because we as individuals, somebody had said here, exhausted father of three in the comments. Marshall McLuhan said villages or tight-knit communities are full of conflict and deep resentments. His point was to be an individual and not a conformist. And this is very much what the founding fathers of the U.S. were saying too, that unless the citizens individually are prioritizing their own liberty, their own freedom, democracy will not last. Mm-hmm. It has to be in the individual. Mm-hmm. But in order to do that, the reason our tight-knit community has fallen to conflict and deep resentment is because we're still egotistical. We are still thinking about this idea of ourself, which is creating those petty resentments, which is creating that need to be ambitious, to have more for yourself, to cut corners, to cheat the system, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And then we have that mentality, and then we create positions of authority. Positions where we really are hoping that the people that we put into those positions of authority aren't petty. We're really hoping that they're not going to give in to their more basic selfish desires. Desperately hoping. And so they just have to put on the show, right? And what do? We're like, well, are they educated? Do they believe in God? Like we have this kind of test to see, like, are they an above average human being, less selfish than me?
Oh my
That's what it is. But nobody's practicing the actual work to be less selfish themselves.
But the questions answer themselves. It's like I'm trying to find the fastest swimmer on the planet, and all my questions are about running.
Exactly.
You know, I think the guy that we picked, he said he can run. Oh, what is it? A point? I don't even know. whatever the terminology is.
Translate.
You know, like he can run a 30 seconds in 3 miles in 30 seconds, right? Amazing, fastest runner ever. He's got the best swimmer award. Give it to him right now.
Yeah.
It's like the questions we ask are all about not being sensitive, and then we wonder why the person that gets hired isn't sensitive. It's like, did you look at what led up to this person getting that job? Like Hitler, how did that happen? I don't know. He just erupted from hell and just took over, and then that's how he got here. It's like, no, it's not a surprise how the politicians get their jobs, in the same way that it shouldn't be a surprise how Hitler came to be. Right? It's from that same mentality that says, I don't need to be responsible, someone else will.
Yeah.
And then that doesn't work. And then instead of taking responsibility for not taking responsibility, we just blame the person that we want to say is evil. Yeah. Politicians, Hitler, they're the problem.
We see, and then we vote for somebody who does the same thing. See, we vote for the person who vilifies the same person that we want to vilify, and exemplifies the things that we want to believe in. Like, if we really believe in control and being a powerful person with authority, person who's famous, person who's rich, we're going to vote for that person.
Yes, we are.
And if they vilify the same people that we vilify, we are doubly going to vote for that person, which is why Trump's going to win this election.
Yeah. And again, it's like, it's self-validation. It's like, what person is going to most represent my perspective of what's correct? And so much of that has stemmed from so many situations throughout your life, you don't even realize how much it's like not really your perspective. It's like, yeah, the one you're holding on to, but like, if you were just left with yourself, couldn't talk to anyone else, couldn't check in with anyone else, couldn't see how someone else was doing, like, you probably have a different look at your life, at the way that you see things, at your perspective of what's, right and wrong, what's good and bad, what's correct and incorrect. Like, so much of it stems from that mentality that it's like, oh, I'm spreading out my ability to validate my assumptions. People are validating these perspectives and opinions. Like, what if no one validated any of your perspectives or your opinions? Like, would you still have them? Would you still do the same things that you do? Would you still act in the same ways that you act if everyone around you didn't think the same sort of things? And I think, you start asking yourself that, and it's like, that's when it can be uncomfortable to look at, but it's like, you realize how reflective your own perspective of yourself, of your experience, of reality is, of your response to things, like how much they tie in together. Like, maybe there isn't any, maybe everyone who's validating that is just hoping that you'll validate them in return. It's like,
I do have a question.
Yeah.
If someone is validating your opinion, are they really validating your opinion, or are they just validating their own by saying you got it right? Like,
yes.
No, right? They're only validating their own opinion. So you never actually get your opinion validated by someone else.
No,
like, it's only them validating theirs.
You can't have your opinion validated by somebody else. That's the whole point. Like, if you don't like yourself and I go up and say that you're a fantastic human being, well, you're just going to disagree.
Yeah.
You're just going to disagree. And so it's not me doing shit. No. I'm not doing a damn thing. I'm really not. Like, I could go up to you and go, insert opinion here. You'd be like, thank you. Right? You're just like, what should I think here? And they'd be like, thanks. But that's the problem, is that then you're in an echo chamber.
It is. That's all it is. And all you're hearing is yourself. All you're trying to see is yourself.
Oh yeah. Like, you won't hear anything else. Like, someone could. It's like at karaoke. If you don't think you sang great, and someone's like, you did a great job, you're gonna be like, yeah, you're just lying. And it's like, oh my gosh, that's such alarming behavior, to like jump to invalidate someone else's perspective.
Or to even think that their idea of the quote unquote job you just did is your idea of the job you just did. Maybe they're not talking about how well you sang, but that you got up.
Right.
Yeah.
That you even put yourself out there to begin with.
You know,
Maybe
and they're
they're-
like, great job, because that's how they would measure themselves. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, you're sitting there going, I didn't hit the right octave on that. And they're looking at
Meanwhile,
something that
they're
just transformed their life. The recognition you could just go up and sing.
And
Yeah.
you just have your head so far up your own ass that you don't even realize, oh, there's other things going on. There
We
isn't
muffled
actually
that
here.
octave for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to
Like,
sing through
no,
shit.
Exactly.
It really clogs the vocal cords.
Yeah, it's
You know?
especially if it's thick, you're not going to be able to see much there. But,
Oh my
It's-
goodness.
Yeah, it's unreal. Like the perspective of ourself. If we assume it's the self-fulfilling prophecy, it's like,
Yeah.
holy shit, we will really, make assumptions about ourselves or reality or
To
what's
protect
going on.
ourselves, oddly enough.
Yeah.
We do it to protect
Yeah.
ourselves, and we cause ourselves more reasons to be afraid.
Just with the initial
Yeah.
assumption that we even could, that there's something to protect, the
That there's
illusion
something
that
to be
there's.
afraid of.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, man.
But we'll come up with ideas
Yeah.
so quick if there's an assumption that there is.
But who better? Who better could come up with a story that would terrify me than me? But also,
True.
who better to dispel the stories that I write than the author? And then realizing that, the author isn't the only perspective to have.
Yeah, exactly. I want to take just one quick moment here. Actually, I'm going to take the rest of the episode because we're going to cut today's episode short by like 10-ish minutes. And the reason is because it's fucking hot. Not lying to you whatsoever. It is hot in this room.
Yeah.
We've got fans going,
We're
but there is
sweating
a bit of a
visibly.
heat wave that is happening in the end of the world that we are in right now. And so we're going to take a slightly extended break, 25 minutes to be exact, and then we're going to be on Patreon for that group. We would love to see you there. We're going to cool off, and then we're going to refresh, and we'll join you in a little bit. But thank you so much for being here. If you have time tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern time, I believe we have a call-in show.
Indeed, we do. A
Fuck
call-in
yeah.
show.
So if you would like to join, feel free to do so. This is a call-in show, so it's a Q&A and a call-in show, which means if you don't want to call in or you can't call in, maybe you just are busy, you can go to our community Discord, and there is an Ask a Question section. Thank you, Jazz, for setting that up.
Thank you, Jazz.
Fill in your question, and we will get to it tomorrow during the episode. And otherwise, if you'd like to call in and be part of the episode for up to 10 minutes, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your insights, your questions, the story that you'd like to share. Perhaps you just want to tell us we're full of shit. Either way, we would love to have that conversation. But just surprise. I know you two didn't see that coming whatsoever. I'm just swooping in like, we're ending the episode. They're like, what? Yeah, no. And I know there's no disagreement because everybody here's sweating their collective metaphorical bag off. I'll end it on sweating your metaphorical bag off. That's a great place to wrap up the episode.
You're sweating, maybe take a cold shower, and we'll
Drink
see you
water.
next time.